Ron Holt, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
John, welcome. I'm glad to be here. Excited to talk about my story.
Yeah, so two maids and a mop. Describe how you got into this business.
Well, my original dream was to be the next Tom Brady. Turns out he was going to play for another 60 years. So number two dream was a cleaning business. Not really. No one ever grows up to want to own a cleaning business, probably not even a home service business. I was, like everybody, working in corporate America. I was in my 20s in Atlanta, Georgia, and just really not fond of the day-to-day of corporate America. Lots of bureaucracy, meetings, a lot of inaction, and just didn't really have a lot of entrepreneurship in my genes or my background. But I, for some reason, wanted to start a business at some point to get away from the doldrums of corporate America. And when I looked across the landscape, I wanted to be in a business that I felt, one, that would sustain itself, that would be able to keep growing over the course of the next several years to even maybe decades. I wanted to be in an industry that I felt was sort of broken. And I wanted to be something that was easy enough for a C student to succeed in. So cleaning industry it was.
I've seen a theme here: football, quarterback, C students.
There you go.
I'm getting the picture. Yeah. So interesting. So you started this cleaning business. So it's like, as we think about residential, there's a franchise up in Toronto where I'm at. I think it's called Molly Maid. But basically, you can call them and they can come in, clean your house or office. You can have them on subscription, or you can do a one-off. Was that the business model effectively? Yeah,
it's all recurring revenue. There's a few one-time jobs, but that was another thing that was really exciting and intriguing to me, is the industry could sort of build on. It's sort of like compound interest. And so you have one new customer at $150. That may seem like a $150 ticket, but if it's 52 weeks, it's really more like whatever 150 times 52 is.
How did you sell against or differentiate yourself from the kind of black market, if you can excuse that term, like the off market? I can't think of the right term, but basically people who set themselves up to clean houses that aren't under a franchise. They're just independent people who clean houses. So how did you
That's a good question.
differentiate yourself?
So early on, I didn't really know. I was, the small business owner just trying to make it. I didn't really necessarily have this plan to build a national empire. I just wanted to make it. I was in Pensacola, Florida. I wanted to be the best cleaning service in Pensacola, Florida. And so my thoughts were to just work harder than all the other cleaning business owners. I felt like I was a little bit, even though I was a C student, I felt like I was a little bit smarter than the other folks in the industry. I definitely was in my mid-20s, so I felt like I had the stamina to do the things I needed to do. I would work nonstop. But at a certain point, you recognize that even if you are working harder than everyone else around town, you still can only scale that 24 hours. There's only so much you can do to work hard. And at some point, as I was building the business and saw the opportunity, I did have this idea and vision to start scaling it. So the scalability of my hard work was just not possible. So I started just sort of looking within and trying to look at other businesses, read books, didn't have podcasts then, but trying to do as many things as I could to learn what can we do to separate ourselves. And I was fortunate to kind of dumb my way into a book called The Purple Cow, written by
Seth Godin. Yeah.
Love the book. It's now 20 years old, I guess, but the book's a pretty simple concept. You see cows, they all look the same, but if you see a purple one, it stands out. You remember when you see this purple cow forever and ever. It's like a stamp in your brain forever. And so that simple concept resonated with me because I didn't really have my version of a purple cow. It wasn't unique at all, other than my blood, sweat, and tears. So I started looking at some of the weaknesses of the business and the industry. And one of the things that kind of stood out was most of the employees just worked for a paycheck. They just wanted to get paid for the work they were doing, which is an honest transaction. But there wasn't a whole lot of alignment in what they were doing versus what I wanted to do. And so I worked hard for a certain reason and a purpose, and they worked hard for a paycheck. So I wanted to figure out a way to align the interest of ownership with employees. And the thing that kind of popped in my mind is to let customers tell us what their level of satisfaction would be. And then we would use that numerical rating. We graded everyone's satisfaction on a really simple scale of 1 to 10. That number would directly determine what our employees earned. That was their paycheck. And so that to me was one way that we could fix some internal issues, just to get guys to, want to work harder and think like an owner. And then we would be able to package that into a marketing tool that would allow us to separate from the competition and become the purple cow that we were looking to.
How did you ensure that your employees didn't game the system? Like, we've all been there where someone wink, wink, nudge, nudge says, oh, look, you're going to get a survey from my boss.
Sure.
Make sure you give me a 10. And of course, being the recipient of that pitch, it kind of leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. I'm like, now I have to give you a 10. If I don't, I feel like a prick. But that's not my true feeling. Like, how did you avoid getting gamed?
Well, so there were various iterations of it. Early on, I actually had I had a lot of bad ideas and a lot of good ones, but some bad ones out there. One of the worst ones was to allow the pay for performance plan to extend beyond just the compensation for the employees, but also for the actual price of the service. And so if you rated the service a 1, which is the worst it could be, then you would pay close to nothing. And so you would be maybe shocked. I was pretty shocked to learn that a lot of consumers game that to their advantage, and so we had to abandon that pretty quickly. Even after we left that phase of it, there were still a lot of iterations. We called people early on, which is kind of silly to say in 2023, but that's how we communicated back in the early 2000s. And so once we started getting a better way to communicate directly with people and let people know that their paycheck, the people who clean in their homes' paychecks were determined by that, there was a lot more genuine authenticity to that feedback than what you would imagine.
So you were transparent. You said, look, this is going to drive their bonus. Like, what do you give them? So you give them a 5. And
so we had a sales team. Somebody calls, I don't know if you've ever hired a cleaning company before, but everyone who inquires about cleaning services really only cares about one thing. And it's the first question they ask you: what does it cost?
Sure.
And so everyone just assumes if you're a cleaning company, you can clean. So tell me how much it costs. So we would pivot within seconds of hearing that question, and we would start talking about our pay for performance plan and how feedback determines our employees' paychecks. And that's why we're going to do a great job. So literally every one of our customers who hired us knew that was in place. That was good. They were going to be asked that question toward the end of the service. So most of the time, I'm sure there were some employees out there who did attempt to game it, but most of the time it was a pretty authentic, genuine answer. And we didn't really beat people up. I mean, people are people. They make mistakes. They're humans. So anytime there was a mistake and there was potentially a lower rating, it wasn't as devastating as it sounds, because we also assume people, again, would make mistakes. So it was an average of all the cleanings over the course of a 2-week pay period, which softened the blow if you just had a bad day. Or
what portion of their comp would be determined by this rating system?
Yeah. You had to, in the early days, you had to really pull out some strong algebra skills, but over time we used technology to make it a little bit easier.
I think you may have misheard my question. What proportion of their total comp was driven by the variable feedback?
100%.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. Now we had to respect labor laws. There was minimum wage laws and even overtime laws. But other than that, 100% of their paycheck was determined by that. So
wow.
if someone's average was a 1, over the course of a 2-week period, they would not earn 0. They would still earn minimum wage. But that also would beg a few other questions, about the.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Wow. That's such a fascinating way to drive a good customer experience. I still haven't gotten an answer, though, to my original question, which is, how do you differentiate against the kind of mom and pop, unbranded, non-franchise cleaner before they get to experience the service you're going to deliver? I get, once they've experienced the ownership of, like, the people who have the sense of ownership and they get that. But they pick up the phone, they call 2 maids and a mop, and there's someone that's cheaper. Is this your point of differentiation? This pay for performance,
no doubt,
or was there something else?
So most of the time, when I say most of the time, 90% of the time someone was inquiring about a cleaning service, they had already hired someone in the past. Very few virgin maid service customers out there. So the reason they're calling us instead of that other group is because something didn't go right. Whether it was they were late or unprofessional, they broke something and didn't replace it, or whatever. So we would ask that question: have you ever hired a maid service before? If the answer is yes, Then we said, well, why are you calling us? And they would tell us pretty openly about what some of the issues had been with other cleaning companies they had hired. And then that's when we would hit them with the pay for performance plan. We would tell them what we do to combat that. And oftentimes we would also talk about our vision for the future. And very few cleaning companies in Pensacola, Florida, had a vision to take over the entire industry and scale across the country. So we would use that to our advantage, and we would talk about that big dream and vision, and consumers wanted to be a part of that. They were pretty excited about it when we talked about it. So most of the time they cared about their dust bunnies being removed. But when you tell people we want to remove your dust bunnies, and when we do that, you guys are going to be a part of a story. You're in the pilot location of this national brand that's brewing right now. So people kind of got excited about it.
That's cool. So you never, a lot of people get stuck inside a business where they have a passion. I think Michael Gerber, the guy who wrote the E-Myth, talked about an entrepreneurial seizure where, you love cleaning houses, you're doing it for somebody else. And you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this on my own. And you start a business. You were like the opposite of that, right? You had It was a dumb, good mistake. I didn't know that you were supposed to really be good at a trade in order to own a trade related business. I just wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to build something big. I didn't like corporate America. And, quite frankly, my capital was limited. There was no banks or investors lining up to invest alongside me. So 100% of the business was funded by my own funds, which for a 25-year-old is somewhat limited. So there were certain realities to what type of business I was going to start. But no, I definitely, even to this day, no one wants to hire me to clean their home. That's a fail. So what were the operating metrics of the Pensacola business? So this is before you franchised. Like, just give me top line, bottom line, growth rate, like just the key kind of KPI. Like, what were the key metrics on the business in just the Pensacola location?
Sure. So let me give you some backstory. We operated within just Pensacola, just one single location for about 2 years. We didn't have this meteoric rise right out of the gate. In fact, the first several months were very desperate because the business wasn't just rolling in. I didn't know how to market. I didn't know what to tell customers. We didn't have the pay for performance plan in those early days. And I just thought, pretty blue eyes would be enough for people to want to hire us. So we had a tough start, and I had saved about $150,000 over the course of the last several years prior to that to get to a place where we could fund it and get through some of those early growing pains and take it to the next level. And I used essentially every one of those $150,000, which was a lot now, but you go back 20 years, $150,000 was even more, especially for a 25-year-old. So
I don't know too many 25-year-olds sitting on 150 grand.
Yeah, it was very scary. And there wasn't a strong revenue at the top line. There wasn't a bottom line, to even talk about. And so there was a crisis when I had to really look within, because it was just me standing on an island to figure out, is this business even sustainable? Like, forget scaling across the country. Can we even make it with one location? And two things happened. One, this whole pay for performance plan kind of, the idea of it occurred. I was staring at the Gulf of Mexico. I can still remember the moment. I had a tough day, pulled into this little parking lot that was looking at the Gulf of Mexico, beach, white sand, waves, everything. And I had just finished reading The Purple Cow, and I literally had an old school notebook out with a pen, and I was just jotting down ideas. And that's where the pay for performance plan grew from that particular day. The other side of that is marketing. This is going to sound not that innovative right now because, again, it's 2023. But in 2003, this was super creative, especially in the cleaning industry. But 3 letters, SEO, became a pretty important part of our marketing strategy. Again, that's good. People are going to laugh right now and say, everyone does that. But not everyone did that back in 2003. And so I just immersed myself in everything that could be SEO. And within just a few weeks, honestly, it doesn't happen that fast anymore. So if anybody wants that secret, there's no way to do it in 2 weeks. But back in those days, if you put the work in, then in just a few weeks, you could literally be at the top of a local community's rankings for free. And so we started generating a lot of qualified leads very quickly without having to do a whole lot of investment towards those. And when we got the phone calls, the magic happened and people hired us. Once that happened, that was about 3 to 4 months into the business, then revenue did experience that meteoric rise. And so we finished the first year with a grand total of $110,000 in revenue. So it's not a lot, but fast forward to the next year, we increased revenue by 5 times that. We had just over $600,000, in fact, in revenue. And that all occurred very quickly. We went from how am I going to make payroll 3 months in to, when are we going to open store number 2? And
how much of that would flow to the bottom line? Like, what would have been your EBITDA margin on 600?
Yeah, we were a standalone business. We had pretty strong margins, about 25 to 30%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah.
I was in a position to pay down debt. Do I go buy a boat? It's in Florida, of course. Or do I invest in our second location? So you probably
I know the answer to that question.
Yeah. We chose to reinvest. I had really fell in love with the industry because I felt like there was a lot of weaknesses that we could exploit. I had really learned a lot about what needed to happen. I didn't know what the next several years were going to bring, but at that moment in time, we were dominating the local market and we did it literally overnight. So I thought to myself, why wouldn't we do this everywhere? So we started opening location after location after that, one after the other, eventually to where we got to 12 corporate locations.
So you have 12 corporate stores. And again, repeating the same playbook. So obviously the pay-per-performance plan is incorporated across all 12. I'm guessing also you used your SEO skills, but just local market. So you picked off another market.
Yep. And
when I type in, made in the name of the city, your name popped up in Google.
Yeah. Well, so the first 3 that we opened, one was of course Pensacola. The next 2 were close to the home market. That was the decision making behind those locations. After stores 1, 2, and 3, I scoured the southeastern part of the U.S. and tried to find the biggest opportunities with the least amount of SEO presence by the maid service, the local maid services. And so
how did you do that practically? Like what was the tool you used to evaluate the SEO chops in a local market?
It was probably called Yahoo then, but people call it Google now. But
it's soon Bing with the AI integration. I think it's going to be Bing in a minute.
That's true. Well, I just Googled. I would go to the market. There's about a handful of keywords related to our industry that consumers you could see were using over and over again to search for what we were doing. And so I would just literally search for those. It's different today. So this wouldn't work today. You need more science and logic.
Sure.
But back in those days, like a grandpa, we could do things a little bit differently. So I would go to Nashville, Tennessee, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and so on, and look for markets that were exploitable from an SEO perspective. And I would just dive headfirst without knowing a whole lot more than that, honestly.
I love it. Amazing. It's amazing that your whole marketing strategy was really sort of pinned on the SEO, the availability of these words in search, which I guess at the time you were competing with a lot of mom and pop shops that wouldn't have been thinking about SEO, right?
That's all I was competing against. There were a few franchise organizations, but most of these guys were ABC Cleaning Company, and SEO was not even, they didn't even know what it stood for, much less how to do something about it, So we would go in and I was the SEO guy. I would be the technician and would just optimize the heck out of the content. I would work database, and all the other stuff that we need to do. It was a little bit easier back in those days than it is today. Today, it's dominated by agencies who control it.
Yeah.
It's a lot more
I'm reminded of, do you know Nick Huber, the guy behind Sweaty Startup? Do you know that guy?
I've heard, yeah. I don't know him personally.
So Nick has he's a we had him on Built Cell Radio. He talked about the sale of his moving company. But Nick is funny because he talks about like you need to look for an industry where they still use fax machines, and that's the industry you want to go dominate. And it sort of reminds me of what you're describing here. So fast. So you get to 12. I got it. So tell me about the decision to franchise. What precipitated that?
Yeah. So I didn't know a whole lot about franchising. In fact, I was on the other side of the fence. I just assumed we would grow with these corporate stores. We were doing well with that. We had reached a bit of a critical point, though, because our infrastructure, our home office, was literally 1.5 people. It was me and a part-time employee. And we had all these individual managers operating those 12 stores. And I really just wanted all the money to go to the local stores. I didn't want there to be this like big fancy, ivory tower and all the glitz that comes from that. So I really worked hard to keep that infrastructure small. That sounds great in theory. The problem is it's very difficult to manage situations. I was on the road. Thank goodness I didn't have any children or anything at the time because I was just nonstop moving, and that was very frugal, and it sounds really Warren Buffety. But the truth is, I needed to improve the infrastructure. I needed to invest in the infrastructure to create more resources and have more talent to do the work we needed to manage everything. And I wasn't really prepared to do that. I just didn't want, that wasn't something that was exciting to me. And so on a whim,
what do you think that was? Like when you looked at that number to really professionalize the business, put the systems in place, hire the people, like did you quantify like what that would have taken?
Yeah. And so that I did. And so we were going to need anywhere from 4 to 5 additional people to just do the work that was needed to properly manage all 12 locations, because we had field operations that needed to be audited. We needed better training in some cases. All of the employees worked for us, and so we had several hundred cleaning personnel working for us and really oversaw about 1.5 people. We had a sales team that was getting real just sort of strapped for time because they couldn't really keep up with the demand. All of that needed improvements and investment. And I honestly, at a certain point, wasn't in love with the idea, but thought that's what we were going to do. But on a whim, decided to just sort of visit a franchising conference in Las Vegas, and everything changed. I had heard all these negative things about franchising from franchisees, especially in service-based businesses, that almost felt the franchisor was an enemy to their business. And
yeah, that's certainly the perception I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just was scared of that. I didn't want growth to be bad. I wanted growth to be good. I wanted everybody to share the victories. I didn't want there to be a winner and a loser. And so that's what I thought of franchising. But I said, I'll give it a shot. So I went out to Vegas, did all the normal things you do, went to the seminars, heard the keynotes, went to the roundtables. All of that was okay. But it was a chance encounter at a table outside of one of our sessions. I had walked outside to just check my email, and across the table from me was this older guy, and he started asking all these questions. It was kind of intrusive, and I was like, man, she'd just get off my back, But I'm from the South, so I just was real nice, and so I answered all the questions, kind of bragged a little bit, like, hey, I got 12 locations and all this other good stuff. And being a good Southerner, I had to return the favor. And so I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm Fred DeLuca. I own Subway. We have 42,000 global locations. And so, immediately got my, interest peaked and started just asking him question after question. He spent the rest of the afternoon with me one-on-one at that table. And I learned in that 4 hours more about franchising than I could have ever learned in any of the roundtables and so on.
I know it was a while ago. What was the most impactful lesson Fred taught you about franchising?
That's such a good question, because you won't believe. So we had multiple meetings after that, and he was he's passed since then, but he was such a humble man. When you think Subway, and if you're the founder of Subway with 40,000 plus locations across the world, you think, you've got the Midas touch. You're just perfect at everything. but all he saw were the imperfections, the mistakes, and the things that he wished he'd have done differently. And so he would tell me those things. The biggest thing that he talked to me about was, when you start growing this brand, right now the brand you have has a very strong bottom line. It just makes a killing, 25, 30% margins. And that's great. That's why people are going to want to be a part of this. But over time, franchisees are going to come to you with ideas and opportunities to improve things. And so we did a lot of things manually, quite frankly. Like we used our hands a lot. And so we pushed a lot of buttons instead of automating buttons. And that's harder and not easy, but it was also profitable. So what he said, and this was something that he used from his time at Subway, that as these franchisees bring these ideas to you to make their life easier as an owner, understand that comes at a cost, and every little 0.1% that you pull from the bottom line is going to add up. And what you're going to potentially see is 10 years from now, you've made the life of every franchisee owner easier, but the bottom line is not nearly as strong. And so he lived that life at Subway. At one point in those early days, Subway was just killing it, double-digit multiples, which is unheard of in food service. And so that was his biggest takeaway. I mean, there was a bunch of other things he talked to me about, but he said, just have your eyes open to every idea that the franchisee is going to bring to you is very good. But usually it's not how to make more money. It's how to make life easier. So
that's a really interesting tip from a legend. Where did it go from there? So assuming that Fred, the lights switched on after Vegas and you decided to go ahead and franchise it.
Yeah. So he taught me that you can be a good franchisor. Franchisees shouldn't hate you. Doesn't mean they'll always agree with you, but there can be two winners in the franchisee-franchisor relationship. And I believed him, so I went back and said, that's what we're going to do. And so we had those 12 corporate locations. We had since relocated to Birmingham, Alabama. And that was at the time sort of the center of our footprint. And my wife's from Birmingham, and so it just made sense to relocate there. So we kept our Birmingham location as our one corporate store, but all the other 11 we franchised to different people. And that was step one. That was we didn't want to sell to people, startups. We just wanted to get these 11 transitioned into franchise owners, managed locations. And that took us about a year. It took us a little bit more than a year, in fact, because we didn't know really how to sell franchises. We didn't know all those things that we take for granted now, because that seemed like back of hand stuff, were all new challenges for us. And so after the year or so that it took for us to transition all those new locations, then we started looking to franchise new locations, the markets we had yet to open in, which was a whole nother mountain to climb, because that was a unique situation for us as well. But
what were the basic metrics? Like, how much did a franchise cost up front? And then what was the rev share? Just give me the ballpark.
Sure.
Ground,
Yeah. So that didn't change a whole lot over time. Those early franchisees that purchased our corporate stores really were purchasing the business more than the opportunity. And so there were different terms for them.
What about the new guys after the 12?
Yeah. All the new guys would pay a initial franchise fee. That was the right to the dirt, that you own an exclusive zone, exclusive area of zip codes. You receive training support, both pre-open and after you open ongoing. All of that was in return for that, we had a 6% royalty that we charged.
What did they pay for the dirt, like the territory, the kind of upfront fee?
Yeah, so that did change over time, but anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 for the territory. Typically, a territory was going to be somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million people or so. Sometimes early on, the early franchisees were very fortunate that we didn't know what the heck we were doing. And so we would have sold the entire state of Texas probably to somebody. So we sold large territories early on, and we had to shrink those later on.
Yeah. So you got them down to 500,000 to 1 million population. So 30 to 40 up front, 6% royalty. And then there was like a sales and marketing fee of some sort.
Yeah. So there was a 6% royalty. That was all the support, training, and everything. There was a 2% what we call ad fund fee. Everyone in franchising pretty much has one of these. That's if you see a TV commercial for a household brand that's a franchise, that's usually the result of the investment in this pooled collection of money. And so there was 6%, 2% ad fund fee. We were very accustomed to managing the corporate locations. And so as a result, we could do a lot of the things in-house. We didn't outsource a lot, in other words. And so we had our own internal marketing team. The software that we used, we had created ourselves with our own team of software engineers. All of the support people were former managers of those 12 locations. We just brought them into the home office. And so they helped with field training and support. And so most of the things that we did were from our two hands. There wasn't a ton of outsourcing.
Got it. And again, when a like if you had a franchisee buy a franchise of Two Mates and a Mop, early, I'm sure there was investment, but once they'd sort of made the investment and got the thing up and running, like in year 5, like would their operating metrics be similar to what you had in Pensacola, like $600,000 on the top line, 25% margins? Like, was anybody able to replicate that, or was it not quite as lucrative?
I mean, like anything, revenue scales. So the larger the top line, typically the larger the bottom line. But
sure,
you would need revenue to pull off a lot of that. Early on, there was not a ton of profitability. Typically, there wasn't a lot of positive cash flow during the first 12 months. That was all a ramp-up period. But sure, I mean, most of the folks were able to get to a place where they weren't quite replicating what we did at Pensacola. You got to remember, we weren't paying royalties. We had to work ourselves.
Yeah.
So once we introduced that 8%, that 6 and 2%, it did reduce the margins a decent amount. But they were typically, for a high-performing franchise, you typically saw 20% margins. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Not all of them, of course, and there were different markets dictated a few margin changes. Operators, a franchisee may decide to buy a boat, and so that would pull the margins down.
And how did you deal with their ability or not to sell their franchise to somebody else? Did you allow them to do that? If so, how did you govern that relationship?
Yeah, no, we applauded that, celebrated that, because that meant they were having a successful exit. We wanted people to make money, So if there was 2 ways to make money, we felt like you could earn dividends or distributions from the cash flow, or you could sell the business, or both, I guess. So we wanted people, if you wanted to sell, that wasn't a scary topic for us. We wanted to talk about it and go celebrate it when it happened.
But I know with a lot of franchise systems, the franchisor has the right to veto the deal. Effectively, they have to approve the new
Absolutely.
buyer. Did you guys retain that right?
We would always vet the new person. So
Got it.
If someone said, "Hey, I want to sell my business," we'd say, "Okay, let's talk about what that valuation may look like. Let's talk about what that process looks like." There were different ways to skin that cat. Some people may have wanted to sell it to their neighbor. In other cases, they didn't have any idea who was going to buy it. So they would need to utilize a broker. If they did that, how much does the broker take of it? What are they going to sell the business for? And then who's going to buy it? If it's not your neighbor, it's going to be a stranger. So that person needs to come visit us. Our home office was in Birmingham, Alabama. And so they would need to literally fly down to Birmingham, meet with us, talk to us, spend some time. We'd break bread with them, and we'd learn who these people are. And from that, which was that usually was a 30 to 90 day process, we would make a decision if we would allow that transition to occur. Most of the time it did. By the time we had invited them to Birmingham, we already knew quite a bit about them. So it wasn't if you were in Birmingham, it was because we believed in you already.
But you had the right to veto or
Correct.
approve, if you will, a
Right.
buyer. That makes sense. And what multiple of EBITDA or SDE, seller's discretionary earnings, would you be guiding the franchisor that this is sort of the range that you can expect?
Yeah. So cleaning businesses that are franchised historically sell for a higher premium than just mom and pop cleaning businesses. That probably goes for all industries, because you own more than a business. You own a territory, you own insight and guidance from a home office, and so on. You've got the history behind you and a strong brand. So most of the time they were selling anywhere from 3 to 5 EBITDA, and that would range mainly because if you had strong growth behind you, that would project to strong growth in the future. If you were stagnant with some of that growth, then typically it would be a little bit lower than that. Like anything, if there was any urgency in the sell, then the price had to reflect that, but
so you're telling your franchisees that, hey, you might expect somewhere between 3 to 5 times EBITDA if you want to sell this thing. Obviously, there are exceptions on either side of that, depending on your circumstances. Had you started to think about at the time what corporate was worth as a multiple of EBITDA? Like, as you're growing and saying to your franchisees, yeah, 3 to 5 is realistic, are you starting to form an opinion about what your company would be worth? Because of course you've got this national network of franchisees. You get a royalty, you get an upfront training fee or a fee upfront. So you've got revenue that's both one time and ongoing. Are you starting to get any sort of sense of what your company might be worth as a multiple of EBITDA or revenue or something?
Well, what I learned, once you sell a few franchises, every M&A group in America calls you. I was certainly I would talk to people, and there was a lot of pie in the sky conversations, and we were early still, and so the conversations weren't as attractive as they would later become, but there was still some expectation that in our industry, the franchise industry, that the multiples actually would be a little bit higher than our industry, because we're actually in two different businesses. We were called Two Maids and a Mop. We had the same logo and so on. But since we were in the franchise business instead of the cleaning business, it was a completely different business. And so with franchising comes contractual obligations. In our case, there were 10 plus year terms. And so with that means there's 10 years of obligations that the franchisee has to meet, or they lose their territory and business. So that is somewhat attractive to most PE groups because of the just reliability, consistency of what that income looks like down the road. So we started hearing a lot about what that might look like for us. I was not in a place at that time to think about something like that, mainly because one, we weren't at a size that was attractive enough for sure. But more importantly, I still had a lot of work to do. I was having fun back in those days, and every day meant something. I wasn't sucked into 100 meetings. So
what kind of range were the M&A guys saying you might get for the company?
Well,
like if
so
3 to 5 was,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. But I mean, we heard anything from the high single digits to 20 plus. It was all over the place. But typically, you were going to be somewhere in the 10 to 15 range for home service franchising. So it was attractive. Certainly, when that bottom line became stronger, but at that particular time, it wasn't attractive enough for us to seriously consider it.
Yeah. So just to be clear, they were sort of giving you ranges, but you were starting to triangulate around this idea of 10 to 15 times EBITDA for the corporate business, the revenue of which was these royalties and the training fee and so forth. You had expenses like your office staff, corporate staff, training people, et cetera. Yep. And then a bottom line profit. Mm-hmm. And how profitable was the business, the corporate engine? Like, did you continue to have these sort of 20 and 30% margins, or did that drop as you hired more people?
Yeah, those margins are typically lower for an early franchisor, because you have more than two, but you have two primary streams of revenue as a franchisor early on. You've got royalty, which we talked about before, 6%. That's great. That becomes a real cash cow for you if you do your job. But early on, most of these businesses outside of the 11 that we transitioned, most of these were startups, and most cleaning companies don't just jump out of the box, immediately. So we weren't making really enough money from the royalty stream to cover what we needed to do as a franchisor. So the other revenue stream are new franchise sales. And so that really is what drove us early on. The problem with that is M&A companies, PE groups, and so on, aren't real excited about that revenue because that's yesterday's revenue. They want tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So we were paying the bills, we were making some money, but most of that was due to the franchise selling, and we needed time for the royalty stream to catch up and to do its magic. So
got it.
We were making money, and from just a bottom line perspective, we were making a lot of money, but it wasn't the right kind of money.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if I'm reading this correctly, you're growing like stink. You're going from 12 to 40 ultimately, 40 locations, 40 franchises. Did I get that right? Well, 40 million in revenue, 91 franchises.
Yeah, ultimately we had 90 plus. They're doing great now. The guys that purchase them are even 100 plus. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay, so you went from 12 to 91 franchises. So every time you sell one of those franchises, you get that nice 30, 40 grand worth of cash flow, nice bump. But when it comes to the value of your company, people looking at it saying, yeah, that's one time. That's not helpful. What we want to see is the royalty, that's 6% coming in from all 91 franchises. That's what is going to really drive value, because we know that's going to continue because it's 10-year contracts and they're not going to want to give up their franchise. So they're going to keep sending you that 6%.
So our job was to foster that growth. We had to provide the right kind of training, support. We had to be as close to a business partner, our franchisees, as we could be without actually being a business partner. And that meant coaching. That meant some tough love every now and then. It meant celebrating a few successes. It meant partnering strong performing franchisees with below performing franchisees. We were always just pushing, because we knew that was the ticket. That was the ticket to more franchise sales. That was the ticket to a higher bottom line. It meant everything. You can't sell a franchise if your franchisees aren't making money.
It's too public and transparent, right? They talk and there's all sorts of reporting. Yeah, no, for sure. One of the things I've known about the franchise business is that legals can be just a brute, like the expense of just having all the legal contracts in place. Like, what were you spending on legals in a given year? I mean, was it astronomical?
Yeah. So we were fortunate to be, when we sold those 11 franchised or corporate owned stores into franchises, that was a bit of a windfall for us. And so we were able to use that money to invest in everything that we needed, from the infrastructure to the legal requirements, to even some of the marketing requirements, to just get the word out that we were a franchise brand. And so that we also did a lot of the work ourselves. And that if we could go backwards, which we've done now with Pink Zebra moving, we'd probably do things differently because we made a few mistakes. But in general, you're probably looking at $500,000 minimum just to say you're a franchise brand, to even close to $1 million for some brands.
You mentioned mistakes. What was the biggest mistake you made in that transition?
Well, I don't want to repeat the same thing over again, but we sold way too large of territories early on. We literally sold to one group all of DC Metro, which I don't know what we were thinking, but we did it. We were fortunate that we sold it to the right group, because they've now done a great job building it.
All those lobbyists need their homes cleaned, man. What are you thinking?
Yeah,
those K Street lobbyists making $7 million a year, they need their homes cleaned.
Here's what I thought. I'm an entrepreneur, so I thought if somebody gave me dirt to sell, I'm going to sell all the dirt. What I didn't think about is that some people only want to sell part of that dirt. And so when you sell a large territory like that, you don't have enforcement over all the dirt. If they're doing their job on a little bit of it, they've met the obligations of the contract. And so by having a smaller territory, now you've forced more marketability and service of that territory. So we had to learn that the hard way.
Super helpful. I want to move to the sale of the company. So you build this up again, 91 franchises, 40 million in revenue. I'm assuming the royalty stream starts to kick in, whereby you're no longer living solely on the sale of the franchise. What triggered you to want to sell? I mean, why not go take a page out of Fred DeLuca's book and go from 91 to 910? Like, was there a trigger that made you think, now?
If you'd have talked to me even 3 years ago, possibly even before this sale, earlier in the year, that would have been way off the radar. Two Maids and a Mop was my baby from day one. It was my firstborn child, so I never thought I'd send it off to college, And so what triggered were sort of two distinct roads, I guess, that I started walking down. One, as we started growing as an enterprise, what I did on a daily basis became different. I became a CEO instead of just a hard-charging entrepreneur who just did different things every day. And I did those things. I did the speeches and had the meetings and had the, managed the projects and all that good stuff. But it definitely wasn't energizing. It drained me. And so that was what I thought corporate America was. That's why I started a business in the first place. And so I started having these feelings that something was missing, even though I was living this like American dream, that a young boy dreams about,
Sure.
Watch Shark Tank. It wasn't satisfying. Something was missing. So about that time, my mother-in-law had experienced a really negative experience with a local moving company. And it was really bad. I won't go through all the details. It was atrocious, like how bad it was. So I just, I talked about finding out what markets to open by Googling. I did the same thing here. I just went to Yelp instead of Google, and I picked out 3 cities that I thought were sort of a good matrix of the U.S. I went to Seattle, Omaha, and Miami. And I literally just read reviews, both good and bad. And I wanted to see if they matched my mother-in-law's negative experience. And in all 3 cities, they did and then some. And so, I looked at that as an opportunity because all these negative experiences were occurring, but people were spending thousands of dollars on this service. And it's just this crazy opportunity, I thought.
So you're talking about the decision to launch Pink Zebra.
Yeah. So it all meets at some point. So when I saw that there was an opportunity there, the entrepreneur in me said, gosh, we just built this thing, Two Maids and a Mop, into a 90 location franchise network. Why don't we do the same thing with Pink Zebra Moving? But
you just can't help yourself.
I can't.
Classic entrepreneur. You just can't help yourself.
I'm sadistic. Yes.
Okay. So being the CEO is boring. It's not what you want to do. I mean, it's what you left in the corporate world. And then you got the shiny ball over here, which is like, oh man, these moving companies are dropping the ball. I can go make money there. So I guess if I'm putting myself in your shoes, I would think, okay, one option is just keep Two Maids and a Mop going, bring in a president and go start the second franchise, the Pink Zebra, or sell Two Maids, or I don't know. Did you consider bringing in a president to run Two Maids, or why sell? Why not just keep it?
So I had recognized that doing the CEO thing wasn't my cup of tea. And so I had brought in someone that had already was serving as our CFO and promoted him to CEO. And he had pulled a lot of my responsibilities away and made life a lot easier for me. And that was really just to help the business grow. It wasn't to set the business up to sell. But when I thought about what I didn't like about the business and what I liked about the moving industry, and I looked at the business, I saw a strong bottom line with growth behind it, but even more growth in front of it, with a turnkey business model, a turnkey management system. Everybody was going to stay in place other than myself. And I said, oh my gosh, we may actually have something. We may have an opportunity here to sell this business. And I have a fun story that will be kind of interesting, I think, for your audience. So my wife and I were down in the Keys. We were in Key West, and we were just there to, personal vacation. And we were walking through one of the harbors, and there was this huge super yacht, not just a boat, but a big one. And it was impressive, but whatever, you just see it and move on. And that should have been the end of that story, but the name of it was on the boat. And so I just Googled it. I don't know why I did that to this day, because why do you do that? Who Googles boat names? But I did. And when I did that, it took me through this winding journey to figure out who owned it. And it turns out it was owned by a company called JM Family, who owned enterprise, another subsidiary called Home Franchise Concepts, which obviously owns home service franchises like Two Maids and a Mop. And so I told my wife that wouldn't it be cool if Home Franchise Concepts purchased Two Maids and a Mop? So that was on the weekend. The next week, I reached out to an M&A group and I said, hey, I'm thinking about selling. What do you know about this Home Franchise Concept group? And they said, well, we know a lot about them. But before you do that and just talk to one group, why don't you open this up to a bunch of people? So that's what started all of this, was this random trip to Key West and Googling boat names.
So cool. And so you were going to sell it to, like, you were going to approach Home Franchise Concepts. Hey, they've got a strategic reason to buy us, et cetera. What was your reaction when the M&A team said, oh, hold on a second, let's create a marketplace for this. Let's not just go to JM hat in hand. Let's create a marketplace. What was your reaction to that idea?
Well, once you tell yourself you're open to selling your business, you usually sell your business. That's what I learned. It's hard to go back, And so once I entertained this idea, that's where all of my energy went, So we were still running the business and doing all the things we had to do, but I had made that mental switch to say, okay, there's going to be a life after Two Maids and a Mop now. And what do I need?
What was it that intrigued you about, like, why was that mental switch so permanent? Like, not something you could go back on? Like, what was it about selling that had you excited? Or
it's a kind of an emotional feeling. So I, for the first time in a long time, felt something different in my stomach, in my heart. And it wasn't this sort of drain of like, oh gosh, I got to go do 6 hours of Zooms today. It was, there's going to be another life where I get to go back to startup world, where I get to change some of the mistakes I made early on building Two Maids and a Mop. There was this excitement for the future. It really wasn't the financial windfall. I mean, obviously that was exciting, but that wasn't what motivated me. What motivated me was, sure, take some chips off the table, but this renewed sense of purpose, that's really what energized me. And once I started feeling how that felt, I said, gosh, I remember that feeling now. I remember feeling that way 15 years ago. And
isn't that wild?
I want to do it again.
Yeah. But you didn't answer my question, or at least I didn't get a sufficient answer to it, which I guess I'm curious about the reaction you had to the M&A team, because some people, when they get the advice, oh, you got to shop your business, right? They say, oh, I don't want to shop it. I know there's this one company over here that has a real strategic reason to buy us, and I know I might be able to get a little more if I kind of shop it, but I get the sense they think it's sort of dirty or like you're prostituting yourself somehow, that you're going out and shopping your company. And they have it's a minority, but it is a group of entrepreneurs who have a fairly negative reaction to the idea of shopping your business. So I'm curious to know what your reaction was when the M&A team said, hey, we got to shop this. We can't just go only to Home Franchise Concepts. We got to go to a few different groups.
I don't know. Maybe for me, I never felt that way. I didn't feel like we were, pimping out the brand. I was genuinely intrigued to see all that early stuff. The early 3 to 4 months was nothing but internal collection of data. We were preparing the pitch. That took a lot of effort and time, and so I didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to think, what does this other side look like whenever 500 different groups hear about this? You got to remember, I was already getting those emails. I could have counted 500 groups already that had reached out over the last several years. So I was already accustomed to, like, people would just call and say, hey, can I come meet with you? And it's a crazy industry, because I had people who would fly in to Birmingham just to have a meeting with me to start a relationship, so that whenever I was ready to sell, then I would have them on speed dial. So it felt very normal at the time. And once we got to the phase of, hey world, we're here, it got real crazy. That I didn't expect that, but
I want to get into that. What's the name of the M&A firm you used?
We use Boxwood Partners in Virginia.
Boxwood. Woods plural, Boxwoods?
It is. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Boxwoods. So how many different organizations did Boxwood shop you guys to? Like, I mean, did they have a short list of people they sent the teaser to? Like how many?
So they specialize in franchising and even have not a sole focus, but a pretty strong focus in home service franchising. And so I knew a lot of other founders who had worked with them and kind of talked to them and said, what's this experience going to look like? And so they had told me that you're going to have hundreds of folks that they reach out to. And, who knows what that next phase looks like, but I don't know the exact number, but it was well over 200 different people.
And when you have hundreds of potential people on a list that are hearing about the company, no matter how many NDAs you get people to sign, the world finds out. Yeah. How did you approach your franchisees? Did you choose to let them know you were shopping the business or not?
You wouldn't believe, not one franchisee and only my leadership team at 𝙁𝙊𝙇𝙊𝙒 was aware of the transaction.
They never found out? The franchisees never found out?
On the day of the transaction. So I've got a great story on that one too. You got to remember, this was in late 2021. So COVID was still just, moving around everywhere. I don't know if you want me to fast forward to the end times, but I have a good story there because my family was under quarantine for a 3-week period. And during that 3-week period, the transaction completed. And so I had to announce this to my team and all of our franchisees by Zoom. I couldn't even.
Oh my gosh. I want to get to that. But first, I'm curious to know, like, again, 91 franchisees, you got 200 potential groups that Boxwood's talking to about buying this company. Almost always someone would find out. So you must have been, or Boxwood's must have been very good at their work because these franchisees, if I'm understanding correctly, never found out.
No, and I feel like that's because it's two different worlds. The franchisees don't run in the same world as a lot of the franchisors.
Did you feel guilty at all?
For sure. Oh, no doubt. I felt I was nervous. I was scared, definitely guilty. I sort of felt like I had abandoned my child. All the emotions. It wasn't. I still remember the day the money arrived, and it didn't feel like I thought it would feel. It wasn't bad. In fact, the group that purchased, I love. They're amazing people, and if I had to do it over again, I would do it all over again because of how great they are. They wanted, and looks like they are treating the brand like it's their own as well. So it wasn't that because I sold it to someone who didn't respect it like I did. It just felt like I did this for 20 years, so for 20 years of my life, I built this from the ground up, and all of a sudden it's gone the next day. So it was an emotional day for me, oddly, because I didn't expect that. I didn't expect to feel that way. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that in a sec, but just walk me through the deal. So a couple hundred potential bidders. How many formal offers, like letters of intent, did you receive?
We had 12. So how this worked this way, we had multiple phases. The very first phase was sort of a tentative, are you interested? And from those several hundred, we had, I don't know the exact number, but probably closer to 50 people that said, okay, let's learn more. And then once they said, let's learn more, then we kind of we started soliciting offers. All of this occurred, by the way, in about 2 to 3 weeks. Wow. It happened very fast. And from those 50 or so, we had 12 actual offers with LOIs. And there were some quantitative factors to consider, money, in other words, the terms, but there were some qualitative things to think about as well. Thankfully, one of those 12 was Home Franchise Concepts, because that was really who I was targeting from day one. But
when you think about the 12, what was the range from the low to the high in terms of offer, like on a percentage basis? Was it like plus or minus 10%, plus or minus 50%? Like it was a huge range, or
there were. I'm going off memory now. There were 3 offers that at the top were sort of in the same ballpark. And then at the very bottom, it was just ridiculous, like, get out of here.
Like, so there's some bottom feeders, some middle guys, and there's three that are
Yes.
that are strong.
Right.
The strong ones, I have to ask. We talked offline, saying you had to be somewhat sensitive to valuation. I totally appreciate that. But if you can share any details into the multiple of EBITDA range you were looking at among those three offers, like, can you give us any sort of sense of what range those fell into?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose any of the terms of the transaction. I can tell you that recent history says that franchisors, especially in the home service space, sell for 10 to 20 times EBITDA. So we were expecting something similar in that range. It's a broad range, obviously.
It's a big range, yeah.
What ultimately determines what side of that range you're on is, one, it's in the eye of the beholder. So, but the science typically is, what can you do for me tomorrow? And so, if you can paint a picture of what tomorrow looks like with precision, that obviously also shows growth, then you typically end up on the upper side of that, from my experience. So that's what we attempted to do. When I said we had 3 to 4 months of just preparation for the pitch, that's what we were really trying to do, is pull all that data from our business and see what we could do to prove yesterday, prove today, and then also prove tomorrow. And I feel like we did a pretty good job of that. It helps that our industry, one, we've got the contracts with franchising, but it also helps that we are in the recurring revenue business. And so you could see what that $150 customer was going to pay you a year from now.
Super helpful. So what you're used to seeing in home service franchising is sort of 10 to 20 times EBITDA. Where you sit on that range in large measure has to do with A, your growth rate, B, the visibility of your future revenue, i.e. how much recurring revenue, contract revenue you had. You obviously being in home cleaning, people need their homes cleaned every 2 weeks, every month or whatever. So you had that recurring revenue. How far into the future did you project out those income streams for an acquirer? Like, were you looking a year, 2 years, 5 years? Like, what were you doing?
We projected it out 3 years. We could have probably went deeper than that.
And what was your churn rate? Like, if you had 100 customers start a cleaning contract on day one 1 year later, how many of those 100 would still be under contract?
Most of them. That was what was
80%, 90%.
I don't know the exact number anymore. It was more than 70%.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a strong number.
Yeah.
And most of that was because if you think about your own, it's who wants to go through the hassle of hiring another cleaning service? If they're doing their job and they're affordable, let's just keep using. We did a lot of good things, but sometimes it was just because it was easier to keep using us.
Yeah. So you've got 70 to 80%, retention rates, is like longevity to your contracts. You're projecting out 3 years, and you're making that case. With these three offers that were all sort of premium offers, did you kind of play one off the other, or did they give you that kind of first and final?
Well, I had zero communication directly with them. So
Okay.
we were working with M&A Group, and they would talk to us about what was going on behind the scenes. They knew my affinity for one of the suitors. And so,
what was it about these guys? Just the boat? You're like, I love your boat.
That's what started it. I knew the other brands, and I had spoken with several of the founders and learned what happens after these guys purchase. I wanted someone that loved the business as much as I did. And the M&A guy says, you're crazy. That's just not going to happen. But I felt like I didn't know any of them personally, but I felt like that they would. And so I was nervous that we wouldn't receive the kind of offer from them. Thankfully we did. And so they were one of those three, and so when we started looking at the different terms of all three of those, even though they were all very similar, I made sure that our M&A group knew that we really wanted to do as much as we could to focus on one. So.
And how did they structure your earnout or your holdback? Did you have a portion of the proceeds that were put at risk in the future, or like how was that structured?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I can answer a lot of that because I do respect the other group and want to kind of respect the contract we have. So I don't know if I can talk a lot about what that transaction looks like in terms of what happened afterwards.
So we'll take things out of your business. Did you learn anything in your research about what's typical in home franchising, home service franchising? About, is it usually like a 70-30 cash, 30% earnout, or is it like a equity holdover? Like, what's the normal structure you're using?
Yeah. So I don't know what today's market looks like, but at that particular time, the group we were working with, M&A Group, kind of gave us a briefing on what the industry kind of looks like. And at that particular time, it was a different time. I know it was just a year and a half ago, but it was the height of the market, and so there weren't as many earnout opportunities as there were even, a year or two before that, or maybe even historically. But at that particular time, most of the deals, from what I understood, were cash based, in mostly at least. And so I don't know what today looks like.
Got it.
That's what we were seeing back in 2021.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. So where does it go from there? I mean, your M&A firm, Boxwoods, is doing the negotiation. You've got these 3 premium offers. They're going back and forth a little bit. Was there any sort of final climax to this negotiation where you all got in a room, or I know you told Boxwoods, look, we really like home franchise concepts.
Yeah. So ironically, I don't know if ironic is the word, but we had a strong bid from one of the wrong ones. So the M&A Group said, you better take it. And I said, well, but it's not the right one. And so this was all happening on a Saturday.
Sorry, I missed what you said in the very beginning. You had a very strong offer from who?
Another group. Yeah.
One of the other groups.
Yeah. And so when we, it was very exciting. This was all happening very quickly. It was a weekend on top of that when this top bid came in, and the top bid said, I want to know by midnight today. And so on a Saturday,
the weekend.
Yeah. So I said, well, we got to reach back out to the group I love, and so that communication occurred, and good things happened very quickly on that Saturday. And so we were able to go a different direction, but it was the most exciting Saturday of my life. I can tell you that.
So let me see if I can parse your words here. So, or at least read between the lines. So you're saying, so Saturday, this group comes out of nowhere saying, here, we're going to up our bid. We're going to put a little bit of cherry on the top here, but we need to know by the end of day today, midnight or whatever. So you reach out to the guys that you really want to partner with because you like their reputation, you like their boat, and you say, look, can you match this, or can you get close? Because I really want to work with you, but this is a pretty sexy offer. And they say, all right, we'll up our bid, and boom, you got a deal done at midnight on Saturday. Am I sort of reading between the lines correctly?
You're close to what happened. Yeah. So
as much as you can share.
Yeah.
I love it. On the weekend, it's amazing.
So we have my wife and I have 2 young kids, so this was all happening as I'm being dad. It was.
Yeah. I can imagine that being challenging. Hey, I want to talk about Pink Zebra. But before we do that, are you up for a quick lightning round of questions?
Sure, let's do it.
1 or 2 word answers, fine. What's the slimiest trick that an investor or acquirer tried to play on you?
1 word answer to that?
Or a phrase or a sentence?
We had a lot of people who tried to lowball the bid and used their time in the industry against us because we had never been through this before. We were new kids, on the block, and they weren't. And so they said, you're crazy if you want that because we've done this before and you haven't. And that early on, those were those were the original bids, and it didn't last long, but for a day or two, I'm like, oh gosh, maybe they're right, So
maybe that's all we're going to get.
Yeah.
Biggest mistake you made personally during the selling process?
Well, I don't think it's a mistake, but the M&A group probably would agree when I say this, that I was very focused on one group. So that's not something I would do. For most people, probably should be more open-minded about it. But I was solely focused. Again, maybe every founder loves their brand as much as I did, but I really loved that brand, and so I didn't want to just leave it to the highest bidder. I wanted somebody who could also love it like I did.
Yeah, for sure. Selling a business can be an emotional roller coaster. What was the lowest emotional point you reached during the process of selling your company?
It maybe not during the selling of it. There was such a frenzy of activity and decisions that I didn't have a lot of time to think. Honestly, it was about. Well, it was the first. So, like I said, I had to announce this decision via Zoom, and so my plan was to talk face to face with my team, tell everybody, and talk to everyone directly. But I couldn't do that. It was crazy time. And so I couldn't visit the office until 2 weeks after I made the announcement. And so my office was still there like a museum. And so they were waiting for me to come clear it out. And so I walk in, and that's my office, and everyone's already doing their own thing. And here I am walking in the office, this old guy in town, and it was very awkward and sad because that was my home, that was my place. And I felt like a stranger. So it was a weird, empty feeling because everyone loved me. I think they expected me there that day, but I wasn't involved in any decisions. There was no meeting scheduled for me. I just was there to say goodbye and collect picture frames, So it was a weird feeling.
Yeah, that. Hey, Ron, just hang on a second. I'm just on the phone with the new boss. Just tell you, just move the jacket off the chair. Just make yourself comfortable.
Yeah,
I get the vibe.
When would you get they were throwing cardboard boxes in there to pack up?
Yeah, don't let the door hit you on the way out. What was the highest emotional point you reached during the process?
Oh, well, you can probably guess on that one. It was the day the funds showed up. We were in quarantine when they showed up. And so my wife and I, a few years ago, had purchased a home in an area lake here. And so we were quarantining at this lake house, and it showed up, and we couldn't really go party Vegas style. We had 2 little kids with us, but we went out and we celebrated as a family. It was a fun night.
That's cool. Were you refreshing on your mobile or on your desktop?
Mobile. Yeah.
It's usually the mobile, refresh. Yeah. Awesome. As you prepared for your exit, were there any resources you can point people to? I've already written down Purple Cow as a great book from Seth Godin. Were there any of the books, courses, speakers, conferences that you can point people to learn about the process of kind of exit and what you learned in the process?
So I was fortunate. I'm an avid reader, and I read as much nerdy business stuff as you can possibly read. But this particular process, there's not a ton of literature out there. Like in your case, it's phenomenal because it's really a void out there. However, I was fortunate to meet Boxwoods many years ago. They're very present at industry events, and you have these informal conversations. You hear them on a stage, and you talk. So I learned a lot about the process by just being active in our industry. So that's what I would probably advise: is find your industry, attend some of those conferences, and learn.
Yeah, that's great advice. I want to underscore that for my listeners. Being part of your industry is a great thing to learn, but it's just an amazing thing to be there for the connections you make, the M&A world, et cetera. It happens at the industry conference. So great that you did that. What did you celebrated with your family during quarantine at the lake house? What did you buy yourself as a trophy to commemorate the win?
This sounds gross when I say it out loud because I just said we have the lake house, but we doubled down on that. We bought a beach house, and so we,
so you got the lake house and the beach house.
We like water.
Okay. Did you get a boat?
We have a boat now. It's sort of
Is it the same size as the JM one?
No, not even close. But we do have.
What kind of boat?
It's a fake boat. It's a pontoon boat, so it's not a real boat.
Like a party barge.
Yeah, you're not going to go, fight the waves of the Gulf of Mexico in it, but you can putt around with the kids and have some fun.
Yeah, great place to watch the sunset and stuff like that. Well, I'm thrilled. I'm glad to hear you bought yourself a trophy. And you're not just sitting on the boat because you've scratched the itch. Your mother-in-law had this terrible moving experience, and now you're off building another business, Pink Zebra Moving. Describe this business. What I love by the name, the name. I see the nod to Purple Cow, Pink Zebra.
There you go.
Tell me about this business.
Yeah, so it's a moving company. We exist for a purpose. That's one of the things when I look back to Two Maids and a Mob, there was a lot of growth, and our purpose was really to to just build a national brand, an empire. We want to do the same thing here, but we want to do it for a certain reason. And so what we want to do is disrupt this industry by delivering what I call unique and remarkable customer experiences. We just want to create a better, more positive customer experience. And I feel like that's missing. That's a real problem in this industry. Even some of the largest moving companies out there create some pretty negative experiences for its customers. The average ticket can be in the thousands. We have plenty of people who spend $10,000+ on their move, and when it's all said and done, they don't like it. They actually regret it and wish they didn't have to do it. But then when it's time to move again, they hire another moving company and spend $10,000. So we feel like there's an opportunity to disrupt this industry. Most people, when they disrupt an industry in 2023, do it by writing code. I'm sure there's an opportunity for that somewhere, but for us, it's exciting because all we've got to do is make people happy. And so our tagline is we make moving fun. We intend to do that. We surprise people. We entertain people. I kind of call us the Disney of moving. We put on a show. It's a real stage, like a theater, when we show up at a home. And as much as I love growing and scaling and recreating the magic that we had at Two Maids and a Mob, what's most exciting to me is to be able to change something about an industry. If I look 10, 20 years, 30 years from now, if this moving industry is different because of us, that's the legacy I want to be known for.
Awesome. The company's called Pink Zebra Moving. Give us a website to go to. Yeah.
So if you're a consumer, just go to pinkzebramoving.com. If you're interested in the franchise opportunity, pinkzebramovingfranchise.com. We'll give you all the information you need to know about the investment, what your expectations will be as a franchise owner, what we do to train and support you, how do we get you open. So pinkzebramovingfranchise.com, you'll learn as much as you can about this business and our opportunity.
Awesome. And we will put both of those links in the show notes at builttosell.com. Ron, if people want to reach out to you personally, beyond Pink Zebra, do you accept LinkedIn connections, or are you a Twitter guy? What's the best way for people to reach out to you electronically?
For sure, LinkedIn. I'm a nerd, like I said earlier, so I am one of those guys that lives on LinkedIn. So reach out. I receive requests all the time to learn more about my exit and learn about franchising. Franchising is a unique industry that either you know a lot about it or you know nothing. And so if someone's interested to learn, I'd love to help them.
Great. And Ron's got a relatively common name, Ron Holt. So I'll put the connection to Ron's LinkedIn profile in the show notes at Built to Sell, so you can grab that there. Ron, thanks for doing this. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Anytime you want to ride on a pontoon, let me know. Come on down.
You might regret that. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, John.